You are standing in a line of men. It is roughly 2450 BC on a flat plain in southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. You are holding a copper-tipped spear in your right hand. In your left hand, you are holding something that is about to save your life. It is tall, almost as tall as you are, made of wicker and stretched animal hide over a wooden frame. It is heavy. Your arm is already aching. The man next to you has the same object, and so does the man next to him, and so does every man in the line. You cannot see the enemy clearly because the wall of these objects held edge to edge in a continuous barrier blocks most of your view. All you can see is the top of the next ridge and the silhouettes of men moving toward you, and then the arrows come. Dozens of them. They hit the wall in front of you with a sound like fists striking wet leather. Some of them stick, some of them bounce. None of them reach you. The man on the far left, the one standing just outside the edge of the wall, takes one in the shoulder and falls. You do not fall. You are standing behind a shield. That moment, that formation, those overlapping rectangles of wicker and hide held by soldiers marching in lockstep, is carved into limestone on a slab that has been sitting in the Louvre Museum in Paris for over a century. It is called the Stele of the Vultures. It was carved around 2450 BC. Discovered by French archaeologist Ernest de Sarzec at the site of ancient Girsu in the late 19th century, and it shows King Anatum of Lagash leading his soldiers in a victory procession against the rival city of Umma. And those soldiers are not just holding shields, they are using them as a system, a wall, a collective barrier that turns a group of individual men into a single defended unit. That image is one of the oldest depictions of organized shield wall infantry tactics in the entire history of human warfare, and it tells you something fundamental about what a shield actually is. It is not just a piece of equipment, it is an agreement between the man holding it and the man standing next to him that says, I will protect your right side if you protect my left. So how did humans invent the shield? The answer is older than bronze, older than farming, possibly older than organized warfare itself. And it begins with a problem that no weapon could solve. Here is the problem. Weapons are easy. Conceptually, a weapon is straightforward. Find something hard, make it pointy, push it into the other person faster than they can move away. A chimpanzee can fashion a spear. A child can throw a rock. Offense is intuitive. Defense is not. Defense requires you to predict where the attack will come from, to interpose something between yourself and the threat, and to do it fast enough and at the right angle to stop energy that is concentrated on a very small point and spread it across a larger surface so your body can absorb it without breaking. That is not instinct. That is engineering. And the shield is the oldest piece of engineering that solved that problem. But here's the thing. We do not know exactly when the first shield was made, and the reason is heartbreakingly simple. The first shields were made of materials that rot: wood, leather, animal hide stretched over a frame, bark, wicker. Every material that early humans would have used to make a shield is a material that decomposes in the ground over centuries. Stone tools survive for 2.5 million years because stone does not decay. But a wooden shield buried in soil is gone within a few hundred years. A few thousand at most, unless the conditions are extraordinary, which means the archaeological record of shields has a hole in it the size of everything that came before metal. We are trying to reconstruct the earliest chapters of a 5,000-year story from materials that nature designed to disappear. So let's work with what we have. And what we have is rock art. In the Tassili Najjar Plateau, a vast sandstone formation in southeastern Algeria, deep in the Sahara, there are thousands of rock paintings spanning roughly 6,000 to 2,000 BC. French explorer Henri Lot documented these extensively in the 1950s, and among the images of cattle herders, hunters, and dancers, there are armed figures holding large oval or rectangular objects that have been interpreted as shields. Similar scenes appear in the Levantine rock art of eastern Spain, dating to roughly 8,000 to 3,000 BC, first catalogued by Henri Briel in the early 20th century. Some of these paintings show archers in what appears to be combat, and certain figures hold objects that look like defensive implements. Now, are those shields? We cannot be certain. Rock art is not a photograph. It is an interpretation of an interpretation. But think about what we do know. By 13,000 years ago, at Jebel Sahaba in Sudan, a cemetery excavated by Fred Wendorf in the 1960s contained 59 skeletons, at least 24 showing signs of violent death with stone projectile points embedded in their bones. A reanalysis led by Isabelle Crevecoeur, published in Scientific Reports in 2021, confirmed repeated long-term intergroup violence. At Naturuk, near Lake Turkana in Kenya, Marta Mirazon-Lar of Cambridge University published findings in Nature in 2016 describing 27 individuals roughly 10,000 years old, skulls caved in, obsidian arrow tips lodged in bone. Men, women, a pregnant woman, a massacre. People were killing each other systematically at least 10,000 years ago, and here's the connection back to shields that matters. When killing becomes systematic, survival becomes systematic too. You do not need a shield when violence is rare and accidental. You need a shield when the man across the valley has a bow and he has used it before and he is going to use it again. The pressure to invent a shield is the pressure of repeated violence, and that pressure existed at least 10,000 years ago. The shields themselves have rotted away, but the bodies of the people who needed them have not. The oldest surviving physical shields come from ancient Egypt. When Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, he found 8 shields. 4 were ceremonial, gorgeous, gilded wooden panels showing the pharaoh as a sphinx trampling enemies and a lion hunting bulls, but 4 were functional. Plain wooden construction covered in antelope hide, with wear patterns consistent with actual use. They are roughly 3,300 years old, dating to about 1,323 BC, and they tell us something important. By the time of the New Kingdom, Egyptians had 2 categories of shield, the ones you used and the ones you displayed. The fact that a dead king needed both tells you that the shield was already dual purpose, a tool of war and a symbol of power. But Egyptian shields go back much further than Tutankhamun in art, even if the objects themselves have not survived. At Asiut, in a tomb dating to roughly 2000 BC, the tomb of Meseti, archaeologists found 2 groups of wooden model soldiers, 40 Nubian archers and 40 Egyptian spearmen. Every spearman carries a large shield with a pointed top. And at Medinet Habu, the mortuary temple of Ramesses III, reliefs dating to roughly 1178 BC show detailed battle scenes between Egyptian soldiers carrying tall, rectangular shields and the sea peoples carrying round ones. 2 different shield traditions meeting on the same battlefield. The Egyptians built their shields from wood, typically acacia or fig, covered with stretched cowhide or antelope skin. They were tall enough to cover the torso, sometimes reaching from chin to knee. The construction was simple but effective. A wooden frame with a central grip, covered in rawhide that hardened as it dried, creating a composite barrier that combined the rigidity of wood with the toughness of leather. Now, let me take you somewhere you would not expect to find shields. Australia. Because the Aboriginal people of Australia developed shield technology entirely independently of anyone in the Old World, separated by tens of thousands of years in an ocean. They made 2 types. Parrying shields, narrow hardwood planks roughly 60 to 90 centimeters long and only 10 to 15 centimeters wide, designed to deflect blows in close combat. And broad shields, wider and larger, built to stop projectiles like spears and boomerangs. When Captain Cook's crew arrived at Botany Bay in April 1770, they noted Aboriginal warriors carrying shields. The woodworking tradition behind those shields is ancient. The oldest known wooden artifact from Australia, a boomerang fragment from Wairie Swamp in South Australia, is roughly 10,000 years old. Nobody taught Aboriginal Australians how to make shields. They did not learn it from Egypt or Mesopotamia or anywhere else. They invented it independently because the problem is universal. If someone is trying to hit you with something, you put something between yourself and them. That idea does not need to travel. It just needs violence. And speaking of unexpected places, let's go to Siberia. In 2014, archaeologists excavating a site near the Irtysh River in Omsk unearthed a near-complete suit of armor made entirely from animal bone. Small plates carved and shaped, joined in overlapping rows. It is roughly 3,500 to 30,900 years old, linked to the Samis-Seminskaya culture from the Altai Mountains region. But even more striking, at a site in the Sakha Republic, in the frozen northeast of Siberia, archaeologists in 2004 found a warrior from the Ymyyakhtakh culture, roughly 4,000 years old, buried beneath a shield made from the bones of a Siberian elk. Arrowheads were embedded in the shield, actual arrowheads stuck in the bone, frozen in the moment of impact. Someone shot arrows at that shield. The shield stopped them. The person holding it survived long enough to be buried with it. 4,000 years ago, in some of the harshest terrain on Earth, people who had never seen a city were making shields from elk skeletons. They were solving the same problem as every Roman legionary behind a scutum. They were just using different bones. Now let's talk about the material that changed shields forever. Bronze. Around 1300 to 1200 BC, bronze shields start appearing in the archaeological record across Europe and the Near East. But here's a detail that most people get wrong. The bronze shields that survive are almost all ceremonial. The Yetholm-type shields from the Scottish borders, dating to roughly 1200 to 1000 BC, the shield from Clough, County Antrim, Ireland, around the same period, now in the National Museum of Ireland. These are beaten bronze sheets, thin, often only about half a millimeter thick, with concentric rings of raised decoration and a central boss. They are beautiful. They are also far too thin for combat. A solid blow from an axe would dent them flat. A spear thrust would punch straight through. These were not battlefield equipment. They were status symbols, votive offerings, objects of ritual power. The real working shields of the Bronze Age were still wood and leather. What bronze did was reinforce them. A wooden shield with a bronze boss protecting the hand grip, a bronze rim preventing the edge from splitting on impact, bronze fittings holding the structure together. The wood did the defending, the bronze did the engineering, and one wooden shield from this period has actually survived. The Long Whittenham shield, found in Oxfordshire, England, dating to roughly 1300 to 1100 BC. Made of alder wood, covered in leather. One of the oldest surviving wooden shields in Europe. It proves what archaeologists had long suspected. The shields that people actually fought with were organic. The metal ones were for the gods. And some of those ceremonial shields were dropped into rivers. Deliberately. The Battersea Shield, one of the most stunning objects in the British Museum, was dredged from the River Thames near Battersea Bridge in 1857. It dates to roughly 350 to 50 BC, the Celtic Iron Age. A thin bronze facing, approximately 77 centimeters long, decorated with 3 large roundels containing elaborate curvilinear latane art, with red glass enamel inlays. Too thin and decorative for combat. Almost certainly a votive offering, thrown into the Thames as a gift to the river or the gods. The Witham shield, found in the River Witham near Lincoln around the same period, had a bronze boar figure riveted to its face, a Celtic symbol of warrior prowess. The Wandsworth shield boss, dredged from the Thames near Wandsworth, features 2 stylized dragon-like creatures in repousse bronze. The Celts were throwing their most beautiful shields into water, for centuries, on purpose. Which tells you that the shield was never just a piece of military hardware. It was sacred. It had meaning that went beyond stopping a sword. But now, let me show you what happens when the shield stops being a personal possession and becomes the foundation of an entire military system. Let me take you to Greece. Sometime around 700 BC, the Greeks developed a shield that changed the nature of warfare itself. They called it the aspis. Modern historians sometimes call it the hoplon, though technically that word just means equipment in general. It was circular, strongly convex, bowl-shaped, roughly 80 to 100 centimeters in diameter, and weighing between 6 and 8 kilograms, about 14 to 18 pounds. The core was made from multiple planks of wood, typically poplar, willow, or oak, glued together with the grain running in alternating directions. A form of plywood construction thousands of years before anyone called it plywood. The outer face was covered in a thin sheet of bronze. The rim was reinforced with thicker bronze edging. And on the inside, there was a revolutionary grip system that changed everything. Before the aspis, shields used a single central grip. You held it like a door handle with one hand, and the shield's entire weight hung from your wrist. That limited how big and heavy the shield could be. The aspis introduced the porpax and antilabe system. Your forearm passed through a bronze band called the porpax, fixed at the shield's center, gripped at the elbow. Your hand then gripped a leather cord or handle at the rim called the antilabe. This distributed the weight along the entire forearm instead of just the wrist. And that meant the shield could be much larger and much heavier without the soldier losing control. According to Herodotus, writing in his histories, the invention of this grip system is attributed to the Carians from southwestern Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. But here is why the aspis matters so much for the story of shields. It was not designed to protect one man. It was designed to protect a formation. In the Greek phalanx, soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, overlapping their shields. Each man's aspis protected his own left side and his neighbor's right side. The shield was not personal defense. It was collective defense. A continuous wall of bronze that only worked if nobody broke the line. The historian Thucydides, writing about the Peloponnesian War, noted that phalanx formations tended to drift to the right, because each man instinctively sought the protection of his neighbor's shield. Victor Davis Hanson, in his 1989 book, The Western Way of War, argued that this overlap made the phalanx a social contract expressed in bronze. You were not just defending yourself, you were defending the man beside you. And if you dropped your shield and ran, you were not a coward because you feared for your own life. You were a traitor because you exposed the man to your right. The Spartans understood this better than anyone. According to Plutarch, in his Moralia, Spartan mothers told their sons departing for battle, "Etan e epaitas," either come back with it or on it. Return carrying your shield as a victor, or be carried home dead on it, because shields were used as stretchers for the fallen. Dropping your shield meant you had broken formation and fled. In Sparta, that was the ultimate disgrace. You could lose your helmet, you could lose your breastplate. Those protected only you. But the shield protected the man beside you. Losing it was not cowardice. It was betrayal. The poet Archilochus, writing in the 7th century BC, caused a scandal by boasting in verse about throwing away his shield and running from battle, deliberately mocking the Spartan code. Now, while the Greeks were building their warfare around a circular shield held on the arm, the Persians took a completely different approach. The Achaemenid Persian army fielded frontline infantry called sparabara, shield-bearers, who carried enormous rectangular shields called spara. Made of woven willow or wicker, roughly 180 centimeters tall, nearly the full height of a man. The sparabara planted these shields in the ground like a wall, and rows of archers fired from behind them. It was a ranged combat doctrine. The shield was not carried into melee. It was a fixed position. And at the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, this difference proved lethal. When geography forced the Persians into close combat with Greek hoplites in a narrow pass, the wicker shields split and shattered against bronze. Herodotus describes the lighter Persian equipment as a critical disadvantage once the fighting turned hand to hand. A shield designed for arrows could not survive a spear. Two different shield philosophies meeting in the worst possible terrain for one of them. Think about what that tells you about shields. The shield does not exist in isolation. It exists inside a system. The Greek Aspis exists inside the phalanx. The Persian spara exists inside an archer screen. Change the system, and the shield that worked perfectly in one context becomes a liability in another. That is not a flaw of the shield. That is the fundamental truth of all defensive technology. Protection is contextual. It always has been. Now, the Romans took what the Greeks started and engineered it to a level that nobody had seen before, and they did it with a shield called the scutum. The scutum, in its classic form, was a curved rectangular shield, roughly 100 to 128 centimeters tall, 63 to 66 centimeters wide, curving around the soldier's body, and its construction was a masterpiece. The core was made from 3 layers of wooden strips, typically birch, poplar, or alder, glued together with the grain running in alternating perpendicular directions. Ancient plywood, cross-laminated so the shield resisted splitting in every direction. This wooden core was covered in canvas or linen on both faces, then wrapped in calf leather on the outside. The edges were bound with stitched rawhide or sometimes bronze or iron edging. And in the center, a domed iron boss called the umbo protected the hand grip and doubled as a punching weapon. The Greek historian Polybius, writing around 150 BC, describes the scutum in detail in his histories. Book 6. Its surface is convex. It is 2.5 feet broad and 4 feet long, and the thickness at the rim is a palm's breadth. We know this construction is accurate because 2 Roman shields have actually survived. The Phaeum shield found in Egypt, dating to roughly the 1st century BC, now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. An oval scutum, roughly 128 centimeters tall, made of birch wood strips in 3 plywood layers, painted with an eagle, thunderbolts, and wreaths. And the Dura Oropos shield, excavated during the Yale French Academy excavations in the 1920s and 1930s at a Roman garrison city on the Euphrates River in modern eastern Syria. Dating to the mid-3rd century AD, made of poplar wood in 3 plywood layers, covered in painted leather showing scenes from the Trojan War. 2 shields, separated by roughly 3 centuries, both confirming exactly what the ancient text described. The Romans were not guessing. They were manufacturing. And then the Romans did something with that shield that no one had done before. They turned it into a roof. The testudo. The tortoise, soldiers in the front rank, held their scuta facing forward. Soldiers in the rear ranks raised their shields above their heads, overlapping them. Soldiers on the flanks faced their shields outward. The result was a continuous shell of wood, leather, and iron that could advance under a storm of arrows and stones. Plutarch describes Mark Antony's soldiers using the testudo against Parthian-mounted archers. Cassius Dio records testudo formations advancing against fortified positions. The formation was slow, it required extraordinary discipline. But inside it, you could walk up to a city wall under a rain of missiles and arrive alive. The shield had become architecture portable, temporary, lethal architecture. Now I need to take you to the north. Because around 600 to 1100 AD, The Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons built their entire approach to warfare around a different kind of shield and a different kind of wall. The Viking shield was circular, typically 80 to 95 centimeters in diameter. When the Gokstad ship was excavated in 1880 by Nicolai Zinnet Goklayson at Gokstad Farm in Sandefjord, Norway, 64 shields were found arranged along the gunwales, 32 on each side, alternating yellow and black. Approximately 94 centimeters in diameter, made of pine about 7 millimeters thick. The standard construction was 7 to 8 planks of linden wood, butted together edge to edge, with a central iron boss roughly 15 centimeters in diameter covering a horizontal wooden hand grip. Some shields were covered in leather on one or both faces. They were light, they were fast, and they were expendable. A Viking shield was not built to last a career, it was built to last a battle. The Viking shield wall, the Skjoldborg, was the foundation of Norse infantry combat. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, overlapping their round shields to form a continuous barrier. The primary weapon behind the wall was the spear, thrust over or under the shield rim. Swords and axes were secondary, used when the wall broke down and fighting became chaotic. At the Battle of Hastings on October 14, 1066, the Anglo-Saxon army under Harold Godwinson formed a shield wall on Senlac Hill. The Norman cavalry under William the Conqueror charged that wall repeatedly and was repelled. The wall held for most of the day. It took a combination of feigned retreats, archery, and hours of grinding attrition to break it, and there is one story from that campaign that belongs in any history of shields. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25, 1066, just weeks before Hastings, a single Viking berserker allegedly held a bridge alone against the entire Saxon army using his shield and axe, killing up to 40 men before he was finally speared from below through the planks of the bridge. One man, one shield, 40 dead. The story may be exaggerated, but it survived nearly 1,000 years because it captured something true about what a shield in skilled hands could do. Speaking of famous shields, let me take you to Suffolk, England. In 1939, at a site called Sutton Hoo, an excavator named Basil Brown uncovered the remains of an Anglo-Saxon ship burial dating to roughly 625 AD, likely the grave of King Raedwald of East Anglia. Among the treasures was a shield. The wood had entirely decayed over 13 centuries, but the metal fittings survived, an elaborate dragon and a bird of prey in gilt bronze, an iron boss, and bronze decorative panels. The British Museum reconstructed the shield using those surviving fittings. It is roughly 90 centimeters in diameter. The craftsmanship shows strong connections to Swedish Vendel period metalwork, suggesting cultural links between Anglo-Saxon England and Scandinavia. The shield was buried with a king, not because he needed it in the afterlife, because it defined who he was in this one. Now, shields did not just protect individuals and formations, they created an entire system of identity, heraldry. As knights became increasingly enclosed in armor during the 12th century, including face-covering helmets, identification on the battlefield became impossible. How do you tell friend from enemy when everyone looks like a steel statue? The shield was the largest visible surface on a mounted knight. So it became the canvas. By roughly 1130 to 1160 AD, heraldic devices, specific colors, patterns, and symbols began appearing on shields. The earliest known heraldic device on a shield is that of Geoffrey of Anjou, father of King Henry II of England, depicted on an enamel plaque at Le Mans Cathedral, dating to roughly 1151, showing him holding a blue shield with gold lions. These devices became hereditary. They became regulated. They became the visual language of medieval European aristocracy. And the shield shape itself, specifically the heater shield, that smaller triangular shield that replaced the kite shield by the 13th century, became the standard frame for displaying a coat of arms. In heraldic terminology, that shield shape is called the escutcheon from the Latin scutum. And here's the thing that stays with me. Shields vanished from European battlefields by the 16th century. But the escutcheon persists. Every coat of arms, every national emblem, every police badge, every university crest that uses a shield shape is a direct descendant of a medieval heater shield that nobody has carried into battle for 500 years. The shield outlived itself as a symbol. And speaking of the kite shield, the Bayeux Tapestry, embroidered in the 1070s, is our best visual record of how kite shields actually looked in combat. It depicts the events of 1066, and both Norman and Saxon warriors carry them. The kite shield was elongated, rounded at the top and tapering to a point at the bottom, roughly 100 to 120 centimeters long. That elongated bottom protected the left leg of a mounted horseman, the one vulnerability that round shields could not cover. By the late 12th century, as leg armor improved with mail chausses and eventually plate greaves, the long point became unnecessary. The kite shield shrank into the heater shield, and the heater shield shrank into nothing, replaced by the armor it once supplemented. But before the shield disappeared from Europe entirely, it had one last great moment. The pavise in the 14th and 15th centuries, crossbowmen faced a critical problem. Reloading a crossbow took 15 to 30 seconds. That is an eternity on a battlefield where arrows and bolts are flying in both directions. The solution was the pavise, a large rectangular infantry shield, typically 100 to 130 centimeters tall, with a prominent vertical ridge running its full height for structural strength. Made of wooden boards, usually poplar or lime, covered in canvas and leather, then coated in gesso and painted with elaborate images of saints, coats of arms, and heraldic designs, named after the Italian city of Pavia, a major center of shield production. The pavise was planted on the ground or held by a dedicated pavise bearer while the crossbowman reloaded behind it. Genoese crossbow units, among the most famous mercenary companies in medieval Europe, operated ideally in pairs, one shooter, one pavise bearer. The pavise was the last large shield used in European warfare. And fittingly, it was designed not for melee combat, but for the one thing shields had always done best: buying time, and then the buckler. The smallest shield that lasted the longest, a round disc of iron or steel, typically only 20 to 45 centimeters in diameter, weighing 1 to 2 kilograms. Small enough to hang from a belt, carried daily by ordinary citizens in medieval and Renaissance cities as a personal defense tool. The oldest known European fighting manual, a manuscript designated I-33, dating to approximately 1320, now held in the Royal Armouries in Leeds, England, depicts sword and buckler techniques with sophisticated offense and defense. The buckler was not a battlefield weapon by the end. It was a civilian accessory, the medieval equivalent of pepper spray. And it survived longer than any other European shield precisely because it was too small and too useful to give up. Now, let me take you somewhere people rarely think about when they think about shields: Japan. Because the Japanese approach to shields was fundamentally different from every Western tradition. In Japan, shields were not carried, they were planted. The tate, the Japanese shield, was a freestanding wooden panel, roughly 100 to 150 centimeters tall, set up in rows to protect archers during missile exchanges and siege warfare. Some were reinforced with bamboo, but no samurai carried a shield into individual combat. The reason is the weapon. The katana, the yari, the naginata, the bow, every primary Japanese weapon required two hands. The entire martial philosophy prioritized offensive aggression and weapon mastery over passive defense. Japanese armor, particularly the later Tosei Gusoku, was designed to provide all necessary protection, making a carried shield redundant. The large sword, the protruding shoulder guards on samurai armor, functioned partially as small shields, deflecting arrows and sword strikes from the sides. Japan solved the same problem: protection from projectiles and blades, but solved it by putting the defense into the armor and the offense into both hands. China took yet another approach. Chinese armies used rattan shields called tengpai, woven from tropical palm vine, circular, roughly 60 to 80 centimeters in diameter, and remarkably light, perhaps 2 to 3 kilograms. Rattan absorbs sword cuts rather than splitting, can deflect arrows, and is cheaper than metal. During the Qing dynasty, rattan shield troops were a recognized military unit, especially soldiers from Fujian and Taiwan. They carried a rattan shield in one hand and a short saber in the other. During the 1661 to 1662 siege of Fort Zeelandia in Dutch-controlled Taiwan, the Chinese general Zheng Chenggong reportedly deployed rattan shield troops against Dutch firearms. The rattan could deflect glancing musket shots, a woven plant stopping a bullet. It sounds impossible, but the physics of energy absorption through flexible, fibrous material is real. It is the same principle that makes Kevlar work 300 years later. And that brings us to the question that should have been obvious from the beginning. If shields were so effective, why did they disappear? The answer comes in three parts, and each one tells you something about the nature of defensive technology. First, plate armor replaced the shield. By the 15th century, European knights were encased head to toe in articulated steel. The left arm, which had traditionally held the shield, was now protected by a steel vambrace and gauntlet. Why carry an additional heavy object when your entire body is already a defended surface? The shield's function was absorbed into the armor itself. It did not disappear. It was internalized. And without a shield occupying one hand, warriors could use two-handed weapons, poleaxes, halberds, longswords, pikes, weapons that were more powerful precisely because they used both arms. The fighting manuals of the 15th century, by masters like Hans Talhofer and Fior de Liberi, focus heavily on two-handed combat. That shift was only possible because the shield was no longer needed. Second, pike formations made shields irrelevant for infantry. Dense blocks of soldiers carrying pikes 15 to 18 feet long. The Swiss, the Landsknechts, the Scottish schultrons did not carry shields because they needed both hands on the pike. And against a wall of pike points extending 5 meters in front of the formation, a shield was not going to help you anyway. You could not get close enough to use it. Third, and finally, firearms. The same force that killed armor killed shields, only faster. A musket ball punching through a wooden shield was not a matter of if but when. Armorers tried making shields thicker and heavier to stop bullets. Proof marks, dents left by test firing a musket ball at a breastplate or shield, became the standard quality assurance. That proof mark is where the word bulletproof comes from, a term invented by medieval armorers who shot their own products to prove they worked. But a shield thick enough to stop a musket ball was too heavy to carry. By the mid-17th century, the physics had won. Shields that could stop the weapons of the age weighed more than any soldier could bear. And then, for almost 3 centuries, soldiers fought without shields. Through the Napoleonic Wars, through the American Civil War, through the trenches of World War I, where shrapnel from industrial artillery tore through uniforms and flesh in ways no previous war had seen. Helmets came back, the French Adrian helmet in 1915, the British Brodie, the German Stahlhelm. But shields did not. The weapon had outpaced the defense, and no one could figure out how to close the gap, until someone figured out how to make a shield out of chemistry instead of wood. In 1965, a chemist at DuPont named Stephanie Kwolek was trying to develop a lightweight fiber for car tires when she produced a polymer solution that looked wrong, cloudy and thin instead of clear and syrupy. Her colleagues told her to discard it. She insisted on spinning it into fiber anyway. The result was a material 5 times stronger than steel on an equal weight basis. DuPont named it Kevlar, and within a decade it had been woven into soft body armor, flexible panels that could be worn under clothing and stop a handgun bullet. Kevlar brought personal defense back from a 3-century grave. But it brought back a specific kind of defense, not the carried shield, the worn shield. Armor, not equipment. The shield had evolved into something you put on rather than something you held, but the carried shield came back too, just not on the battlefield. Modern riot shields made from polycarbonate, a plastic roughly 250 times stronger than glass and 30 times stronger than acrylic, emerged in the 1960s and 1970s during periods of civil unrest. Transparent, so officers can see through them, curved to deflect projectiles. Typically 90 to 120 centimeters tall, weighing 5 to 5 kilograms, and here's the part that should make you stop and think. When police officers form a line with overlapping riot shields and advance in formation, they are performing the Skaldborg, the shield wall, the same tactic that Viking warriors used at Stamford Bridge, the same tactic carved into the Stele of the Vultures 4,500 years ago. The technology changed, the formation did not, because the problem did not. A line of people holding shields, edge to edge, is still the most effective way to create a moving barrier against thrown objects and melee attacks. The Vikings knew it, the Romans knew it, the Sumerians knew it, modern riot police know it, nobody taught any of them. They all arrived at the same solution because the physics demands it, and ballistic shields. Used by SWAT teams and military special forces during active shooter situations, hostage rescue, building clearance, made from steel, ceramic, Kevlar, ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, or composite materials. A handgun-rated ballistic shield weighs roughly 7 to 12 kilograms. A rifle-rated shield weighs 18 to 30 kilograms or more. Some include transparent bulletproof viewports. Some include weapon ports, so the officer can fire a handgun from behind the shield. Some include LED lights to blind threats. The weight problem echoes the same arms race as medieval armor. More protection means more weight means less mobility. The equation has not changed in 5,000 years. The materials have, and there is one more story I need to tell you, because it captures the entire history of the shield in a single, strange, perfect moment. In 1880, in the Australian bush, an outlaw named Ned Kelly and 3 members of his gang forged their own armor from iron plow moldboards. Kelly's suit weighed roughly 44 kilograms. During the siege at the Glenrowan Inn on June 28, 1880, the Kelly gang wore this armor in a gunfight with police. Bullets bounced off the iron plates. Officers reported firing at Kelly and watching him keep walking. but the armor had no protection below the knees or on the hands. Kelly was shot in his unprotected legs and collapsed. He survived and was captured, hanged 5 months later. 44 kilograms of stolen plow iron, hammered by hand in the Australian outback, shaped into a shield the man wore rather than carried. That is how badly humans want to not get hit. Even when the technology is crude, even when the materials are improvised, even when the design has obvious flaws, the instinct is the same one that drove someone to stretch animal hide over a wooden frame 10,000 years ago. So here is the answer. How did humans invent the shield? They invented it the way they invent everything that matters. Dozens of times independently on every inhabited continent, using whatever material was available in response to whatever was trying to kill them at that particular moment. Animal hide stretched over wooden frames in prehistoric Africa and the Near East. Elk bone laced together in Bronze Age Siberia. Wicker woven into walls in ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. Layered cowhide in Aboriginal Australia. Bronze-faced wood in Mycenaean Greece. Cross-laminated plywood in Republican Rome, linden planks in Viking Scandinavia, rattan woven in Qing Dynasty China, polycarbonate plastic in 20th century police departments. Every one of those shields was a different answer to the same question. How do I stop the thing that is trying to kill me? Was the shield a single invention from a single source? The probability is effectively 0, less than 5%. The archaeological, anthropological, and material evidence overwhelmingly supports independent, convergent invention across cultures separated by oceans, continents, and thousands of years. The concept is too simple and the need too universal. If a human can be hurt, a human will figure out how to put something between themselves and the hurt. Every time, everywhere, with whatever they have. The probability that shield technology emerged independently in multiple cultures is above 95%. As certain as any conclusion about prehistoric technology can be. But here's the part that stays with me. The shield is the only weapon, if you can even call it a weapon, that exists purely because someone else made a weapon first. Every offensive tool in human history, the spear, the sword, the bow, the gun, can exist on its own. It does not need anything else to justify its purpose. The shield cannot. The shield is a response. It is the second half of a conversation that starts with violence. And that conversation has been running continuously for at least 10,000 years, probably longer, and it has never stopped. Every new weapon creates a demand for a new shield. Every new shield creates a demand for a weapon that can defeat it. Bronze shields answered stone weapons. Iron weapons answered bronze shields. Plate armor answered swords. Firearms answered plate armor. Kevlar answered firearms. Armor-piercing rounds are trying to answer Kevlar right now. The arms race has no endpoint because the problem has no permanent solution. You cannot build a shield that stops everything forever. You can only build a shield that stops this particular thing right now. And right now, somewhere in the world, someone is testing a new material, maybe graphene, maybe a new polymer composite, trying to find the next layer that is lighter, stronger, thinner, better. And they are doing the same thing that a Sumerian soldier did 4,500 years ago when he raised a rectangle of wicker and hide over his head and walked toward a man with a bow. The same thing an Aboriginal warrior did when he raised a strip of mulga wood and waited for a spear. The same thing a Viking did at Stamford Bridge when he planted his feet on the planks and held his linden shield against 40 men. The oldest answer to the oldest question, not how to kill, that part was easy. How to survive.